I hope we're just about there. It's great to see you all. Thanks very much for coming along, as it were, in inverted commas. I'm going to pass over to Duncan in just a couple of minutes. What Duncan's going to do is he's going to give us something of the background, so the parameters that were given to all schools by Ofqual and by the government, which then obviously set up the process of us working that through, and then talking about how we went through the process of coming to these decisions as to the way we think makes the best of the parameters we've been given and gives the pupils the best advantage and the best opportunity as well. And then, if you'd like, please to use the chat function on the Zoom, and any questions that come through then, we'll just take them as we go. And for those of you who were on earlier on, thank you. I think it works quite well, the chat function, just to sort of keep the flow of questions coming in. Just before we get started, first, I wanted to say, first of all, it's been great seeing some of you recently, whether it's just been around and about near the school or bringing children on site for the testing. It is fantastic to have the boys and girls back with us, and I hope that you're enjoying not having them with you as well at the moment, as we're sort of setting them back in. And certainly these sort of the 3 weeks we've got now before the Easter holiday, I think it may actually be almost a perfect length of time. I think if it was 4 or 5 weeks, that could feel like a real mountain ahead of them to slog and climb through. And if it was only a couple of weeks, that might feel a bit kind of woof, this right in our faces and possibly feeling a bit more stressful. So hopefully that 3 week window will work in our favour. I did want to say a massive thank you for all the support on the testing schedules that went through. That meant that, having got the 2 tests done last week, we were able to get everybody back at the same time and have as little disruption as possible as we've come back in now. And thank you very much indeed. It did seem to work really smoothly. You might be interested to know that we've conducted well over 2,000 individual tests in the space of that last week and a day, week and couple of days. And we've not had a single void test, as in one that wasn't sort of attributable, and secondly, we've not had a single positive test either. So that's been great news, and great sort of sense that we really are sort of all back in, and hopefully having had the chance to do a couple of tests, for many of them their first ones with us here at school, as they carry on with that with you at home. That should give them just that bit of confidence and reassurance that they know what they're up to. So, right. I'm going to pass over to Duncan then to give us the background, the process, and then just take us through where things stand, and then we'll just go into any questions that you've got. Please just use the chat function.
Okay, so just give us the context. We had the government announcing that they were not going to run any normal exams in the traditional sense at the beginning of the year. There's a period of consultation, and then they made it clear that there wouldn't be an algorithm which they would use to calculate it, but that teacher judgment would be the decider. Now, that took a little bit of time for them to work out, okay, what does teacher judgment mean? And the structure we've come up with needs to and has fitted in with the various guidelines which the government has given us to work within. So some of the features of it are that they were encouraging us to sort of continue assessment and teaching for as long as is possible. There is also a time frame insofar as we have to have submitted all the final teacher assessed grades by the 18th of June. If we move that back, the 18th of June is the second week of the second half of the summer term. Once we've got marks, if you like, we need to do some internal moderation, some checking against what exam boards would expect instead of grade ranges and so forth. So that really takes us back into the first half of term. So we've really got the 6 weeks of the first half of term and this 3 weeks to develop and to get the information we need to get the grades. Now, there's been a fair bit of talk about using things throughout the whole of the 2 years, but equally the government has said quite explicitly that it is likely that the best evidence is going to be gathered towards the very end of the course. And importantly here, evidence is required for the judgments we make. I think when the news first came out, there was a sense that, you know, teachers could just say, right, I think you should be a B for this and an A for that, and that would be that. That's not the case. We do need to provide evidence, and there's some guidance about what sort of evidence we should use. They've encouraged us to use exam-style questions, particularly, you know, using past exam papers or the exam questions, which they're going to provide us in what I expect will be essentially a bank of questions. We have to be able to evidence the decisions we make, and that is the sort of the quality assurance and if you like, the only mechanism which would stop every school in the country, except ours, because we have integrity, of course, of just giving everyone an A star for everything. So there are mechanisms which are in place to make sure that we do not, without good reason, exceed significantly previous year's performances, because I know that most schools' performance is, broadly speaking, the same from one year to the other. Now, at A level, when you've only got maybe 12, 15, 20, the biggest subject group is about 55. There is some change between year to year on how how many A stars, A's and B's different groups get. But that variety is something which we need to be able to sort of evidence. So if we have what appears to be a stronger year group, we need to be able to say, yes, they are stronger, and this is why it's stronger. So what we've come up with is two things. One is a process of assessment, but also is a system which we feel will ensure that both we give pupils the best chance to show us what they're best at, but also if they have a bad day, we have some fallback mechanisms to go back and revisit it. So hopefully we'll be in a position where, although there are a series of assessments, as there are in a normal exam season, first of all, we can construct them in the way which is most favourable to pupils as a whole. But also, if someone has a bad day, or even a bad couple of weeks, we can look back at other information to check that actually then they don't suffer as you would do in a normal exam season. If you have one bad paper, that will inevitably move your marks down, and we hope we've worked out a way of doing that. So I'll just now talk a little bit about the mechanism we put in place and a little bit about why we've chosen this particular approach. A number of you, I know, were in the presentation we did about an hour ago, the GCSEs. We've taken a different approach because I think it is different, and we feel that the way we approach the upper sixth will give them the best preparation to do their best. So if we work from the end game of it, in the last 3 weeks of the half term, of the summer half term, pupils will be sitting typically 3, in some subjects 2 assessments over a 3-week period. It'll probably, for pretty much everyone, it'll come out as 3 subjects per week, giving a total of 9. That's the most common shape of it. Those assessments will be typically an hour to an hour and a half long. Some of them may be a little bit longer because of the way we have to divide things up. But we are also taking some content out. We're also, while we're using exam questions, we're not using exam whole papers, so that we can bundle together, compartmentalise a series of topics or themes in one paper, so that people have a narrower range of things to prepare for each of those final assessments. So that will give us three marks in most cases, and for those subjects which have coursework, there will also be a coursework mark as well, and we'll combine those things those together, and then we'll come up with a grade based on those marks there. Now, In the 3 weeks before those assessments, pupils will have normal teaching, but they'll also have some practice assessments. They won't count directly for anything, but they will help us check that the final result is appropriate. At the end of this week, pupils will be, and you will be sent home a predicted grade, an indicative predicted grade, which is our teachers, or each pupil's teacher's best estimate of where they think, or what grade they think they're going to get in the end. It's not how they're doing right at the moment, it's where they think they're going to get in the end. And so that prediction is another sort of check. So that'll come at the end of this week. So how are we going to sort of combine all these things together? Well, first of all, as I said, we're going to get those 3 marks. We get a grade there, and then we look at that grade. And if that grade is the same as or better than the predicted grade and the practice work they've been doing in the first half of the summer term, then that grade will stand. So that will become the teacher assessed grade. If, however, the grade which arises from those last 3 weeks of assessments is lower than or is disappointing when compared with either the work they've done in the first 3 weeks or the predicted grade, then we'll go back and look at things more carefully and more closely. Now, probably the most likely scenario is that someone has let's say, put in 2 strong performances in 2 assessments, and another one has been a bit weak, and that might sort of drop them down a little bit. We'll look at that. And so actually, look, two strong, two A grade looking pieces of work, followed by 1 D grade is probably a case of, nerves, things didn't go right on the day, could be anything there. And then we can, go back and possibly ignore that particular paper, or we might look for some further. Is this just part of the course they had difficulty with? So it means it's a check on that final assessment there. So essentially what we're trying to do is say, okay, the final a series of assessments where we can compartmentalise the topics as much as we can shorten them, we can limit the content a little bit, is likely to give the best indication of how strong a pupil is in a given subject. However, we do know that things don't always go to plan, and either one bad day or just the accumulated challenges and stresses of a half term may result in a poorer performance there than is right. And that's where we can go back and look at earlier work they've done in that half term, but also look at the prediction which we will make, or is being made now, which is very much a professional judgment prediction. The teachers have taught each of the pupils for almost 2 years. They've got a very good sense of where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, how pupils tend to sort of accelerate, improve towards the end of a course. And our experience, having done this in the past, is that our predictions are actually very accurate. So we think they're a very good way of checking against the possibility of this next half term, some initially disappointing results in 1 or 2 places, so that we can go back, check, and see that we've done everything we can, and we'll look around to work out, okay, what is the right mark, even if those final assessments don't look quite as good as they might be. I expect in most cases they will be, they will be strong because they'll be guided through it, and they'll be prepared for it. They'll have a much better idea of what it's like, the sort of topics and themes which will come up in questions. So they'll be in a stronger position to go in and see a paper and say, oh yeah, I think I can do this pretty well. They'll be shorter as well, so that the stress of the time is not going to be nearly so great. So hopefully we won't have to use those backstop mechanisms very often, but they are there to help us out with that. So I'll pause there. I think there's a lot of things coming through, so I'll hand over to the headmaster to sort of compare those questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Duncan. And just to give some big picture stuff. So one of the balances that we've been trying to get through, and we've had sort of big discussions at school about this, has been we wanted to avoid having a limited number of very high stakes exams right towards the end of the course. But likewise, we didn't want to put them through 9 weeks worth of being sort of tested on a perpetual basis between now and then. So the framework that Duncan's been describing there has been designed to try and give them a good preparation, a good build up, the opportunity to have the 3 weeks at Easter for the revision, knowing which content they don't need to revise, and then give them those staging points. But then again, still making sure that we don't make everything rely upon how they perform in that final 3 weeks of there as well. Because we've been given a great deal of leeway to exercise our own professional judgment. One of the advantages, of course, is that as we look backwards at previous cohorts, the school does have a very strong track record. And so if it comes to being asked to justify to the exam boards why we think certain grades are acceptable, we think we'll be in a very strong position. I'm going to sort of use that to pick up on the first question that's come through on the list, which is this one. It says, have you received direction from the exam board as to their individual advice, as this is not due before the end of March? If this differs from how Peters has set out its programme, could that disadvantage our pupils if different schools are not carrying out a similar process? So thank you very much, Annabelle. I mean, so first of all, we're going to make sure, and we're determined that our children should not be disadvantaged. Sorry, you're blaming on Toby, fair enough. I'm not even Toby. So we want to make sure that our children are not disadvantaged through this process. They've had a heck of an 18 months already, and so the last thing we want is to have some kind of a process where it just doesn't feel right, where our professional judgment, as Duncan has mentioned, every year for years, we've actually asked ourselves the question, how well do we think they should be doing as they get towards the end of the course? And when we had to do that last year for the CAGs, one of the first things we did was to go back and say, well, how accurate has the school been over the last few years? And the answer was we'd been accurate within sort of 3 to 5% of the grade boundaries historically. So that confidence we've got. Now, the specific question here from the search is actually to do with what about new information coming in from the exam boards? It's clearly very disappointing that the whole way in which this came out. I mean, the fact that I heard about this on whenever that Thursday morning was on the Today programme, that the news had been released, and then it turned out it was that press release from DFE, and they said Ofqual will be in touch, and then Ofqual was in touch at 11 o'clock that day, and then we haven't had some more clarity from the exam boards. Is a frustration. A couple of thoughts in there. The first one is that the outcome of the consultation and what Ofqual and Department for Education have been saying actually makes it pretty clear the sort of the pattern of play. We don't see how there could be a radically different alternative programme required by the exam boards. The massive caveat that I'd put on that is that if there is something that's different and we need to adapt it, of course, that's exactly what we'll do. We're not going to run the risk of saying, well, we're ignoring what you're asking for and we've decided to just go it alone. The flip side is that we felt that if we waited and waited and waited to hear more and more from the exam boards before we shared our plans with the pupils and with yourselves, that we would actually then be throwing a lot of pressure into the system when I think we already feel that sense of the deadlines and the weeks going by rapidly already. So I hope that helps. That's sort of some of the logic behind those. So the next question to move on to is to do with the trials. So when we did our trials, the school did it very professionally with as close to true exam conditions as possible, even though we were online. Yet we heard of a lot of schools doing open book exams, etc. How will we keep the assessments fair in comparison with other schools in that scenario? So Duncan.
Yeah, look, it is a difficult one, but the government has put in place one key bit of quality assurance, and that is, or two bits of it. One of them is that they will be sampling the work which we use to make our judgments on and other schools, and they've said that needs to be random, but also it needs to be targeted, which seems like they're opposite, but they're not quite. So they will be randomly checking the work that people do, but also they will be targeting, I think, those schools where the results seem to be significantly different from what has happened before. Now, that doesn't mean that, if we have a particularly strong group of, let's say historians one year compared with the previous year or vice versa, that they're going to change it. But there is that mechanism for the government to, or the exam boards to look at that. The other thing is they've made a sort of a fairly vague, but I think important statement is that, that when we're developing our marks, we need to take some notice of how the school has performed in the past. Now, it starts to sound a bit like the algorithm from last year, but what they do recognise is, on the whole, schools perform in a fairly similar way from one year to the other. It's not nearly as much the case at A level, and certainly not from subject to subject, but it's a broad thing. So there is this check which I think every school will have at the back of their mind, is what they can't do is just put everyone in for ridiculously high grades. They will be checked up upon. We can't do anything really to ensure that other people are doing the right thing. We'll have to rely on the exam boards to do that, and I think they probably will. But how rigorous it will be is going to be a difficult thing. What we are confident in is that we will be able to give a fair and positive grade for each pupil, because one of the things about our particular mechanism is that it should mitigate against the one bad day, which is a very typical thing of a normal exam season, is that there's a proportion of pupils who slip a grade because they have a paper which goes badly, and our system, I think, is going to mitigate against that, so the one bad day shouldn't be affected.
And again, that pattern that Duncan was outlining, where they'll know as they go into the Easter holiday what content to revise and what content is not going to be included at all. And I think the teachers know their classes really well. They know their pupils really well, and so they have discretion there as to decide themselves which bits do they think they would want to take out and which bits to leave in. And then that pattern of being able to see things coming and having a sense of, you may not know the exact questions, but you know the topic areas which are going to come up on the assessments. And of course, normally you go in at the end of 2 years having done that massive memory test of everything you've done. Potentially 100% of the course is going to be assessed, although there's no way that amount will be on the actual paper, so you have that variability. And then also, as we all know, you get on some years your favourite topic comes up, but that happens to be the particularly obtuse or ambiguously worded question, and therefore it sort of throws you out as well. So hopefully that structure of having a far more sort of predictable, repeatable pattern should come through. There's a couple of questions that I can see to do with grades and predicted grades in universities. So I'll take them both at the same time, if that's okay. So the first question is, how will these new grades compare with their predicted grades from last year, as that's what they've used to apply to universities? Well, in that sense, that's not actually a very different scenario to what happens every single year, because back at the end of the lower sixth, start of the upper sixth, the teachers are asked to give predicted grades, which in many ways are them on a good day, if that makes sense. So what grade do you think they are capable of achieving, bearing in mind what you know of them after 1 year's worth of study and all the development that the boys and girls make as they go through the upper sixth. And then as you get through this stage of the course, things start to refine a bit more closely. You start to get a better sense of how they're performing and what the most likely grade is. And that's why we've always done that process around this time with the upper sixth, sharing with them a grade, to say that's where we think it's most likely heading, to assist them with making their university choices. And that's what brings me on to the second question. So I'm just scrolling through here. The second question to do this one, which is, can you give us an idea of when they should accept their firm offer, and if achievable, to avoid a nightmare results day? So thanks, Sarah. So basically, they don't have to make their final choices until at some point in the summer term.
10th of June.
10th of June is the end date. Now, the flip side of that is that universities, of course, are extraordinarily adept at using things like, we're deciding accommodation and we can only sort of allocate you Savile Row versus underneath the arches if you give us an indication as to whether you're coming at this stage or not. So they do have these sort of mechanisms whereby they try and effectively, let's be frank about it, put pressure on the pupils to make their judgment calls. So that's something that we're really familiar with and used to, of guiding the pupils and not going too early and not going too late as well. So that process will be happening the same again as we start to see how things are going through. Just a little bit of insight for you on how the universities have been behaving It's been quite an interesting year. Universities such as Loughborough and Nottingham, for example, Exeter, Newcastle, they've jumped in really quickly with their offering of making offers to our pupils, and they've been massively strong in making tons and tons of offers and very, very few rejections at all. So a lot of the universities have really piled in very hard and very positively, and I think sending massive message to Peterites, we're very keen to see you coming to us, and that's what's been going on. There's a more limited number of universities who've been behaving in a different way. I mean, Durham has actually made a higher percentage of offers at this stage of the cycle than they would normally have done, and interestingly have actually come in with some offers below their usual offer rates as well. So Durham is actually sort of slightly ahead of where they would normally be, but there are still some of our pupils, and obviously a very popular university for many of our pupils, who are waiting on Durham. The others are real standout ones that stick out like a sore thumb. LSE, we've only got 7 applications into LSE this year, but none of them have received an offer at all yet, and no rejections. And then it's the two Scottish universities, or the two most popular Scottish universities. Other ones are available for us, which is Edinburgh and St Andrews. So we've got about 50 pupils who have applied to Edinburgh, and about 20 who have applied to St Andrews. What we've seen from those universities is virtually no rejections of pupils who've applied for there at all, but likewise offers are very scarce indeed, and that they're holding back. Now my hunch on this is that the universities themselves, they're trying to get some kind of a sweet spot out of this experience, and that sweet spot is to where they wish to enlarge their cohorts, to take advantage of being able to enlarge their cohorts. Likewise, they've been waiting to see, this is just a hunch, but I think it's reasonably well founded. They've been waiting to see, so how are the grades going to be awarded, and what level of grade inflation above 2019 and previous might we experience, because they likewise don't want to get themselves caught out and over offer and not actually be able to accommodate and look out for them. So on that basis, the universities aren't going to get any more information now. They don't get any further sort of updates from schools as to how things are going or anything of that nature. So to my mind, I would really, really love to see that limited number of universities get off the fence, frankly, and start to make their decisions and get the offers out to our boys and girls. The one tiny little extra bit I'd throw into that mixer is that for the 25 children who took their EPQs recently, we've had some tremendously strong results have come back from those. So if your son or daughter has received that, and you are waiting for offers from universities, by all means do email through to the admissions department and say, well, actually I've just received this A star or this A grade for my EPQ. I thought I'd update you with that information, and if you need school to help with that and sort of put the validation of it, just let us know. So that's a couple of sort of ones there which I hope helps. I'm just going back up now to where we were. So yeah, so thank you. So question here, which is, to what extent will the trial mock exams in January be taken into account in the final assessments? Duncan?
They won't be unless we need to look back because the final assessments were less than we expected to. So essentially, you've got the predicted grades, which is coming this week. We've got the work which pupils will do in the first week of next term, the first 3 weeks of next term, and then the final assessments there. The final assessments, if they're in line with the predictions we have, that will all be there. Only if things are much worse will we go back to earlier things. The trials are something for us to consider. However, then the trials themselves, because they're designed for practice and to get used to different things, and they're only on part of the course, aren't always a very good predictor. So we may look at those if someone doesn't do well in this next half term.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. And Emily, thank you for this one. Will there be any external moderation on the tags? Also, are there any limits on the number of specific grades that can be awarded by the school? There will be. I mean, it was CAGS last year, it's sort of tags this year. We don't like tags, by the way, because we think it vests too much in the idea of an individual teacher rather than the school, which is actually how the process works. But so the external moderation will be the exam boards doing that limited sample of a limited number of subjects from a limited number of schools. I think they've couched couch that in so many sort of, triple layer caveating, it's not true. But they will be looking overall at the grades that the schools are putting forward and comparing them to the pattern and profile they'd expect from those schools previously. And we think that's how they'll actually use those to then decide which schools they want to go and put more of a spotlight into and see how things are going. There is no limit on the number of specific grades that can be awarded by the school. There is no limit there because although what we will do as part of our moderation, we'll be looking back at the sort of previous cohorts. As Duncan said, at A level, mathematics is a very large entry subject. You have some very small entry subjects. So we won't be looking at retrospectives to then try and come up with some ghastly algorithmic way of saying, well, we'd expect to see a certain number of A stars, a certain number of A's and so forth. We'll be looking at it as a straight one-to-one in terms of our pupils this summer and what grades we think are the right ones for them. One for Duncan, which is to do with art. So thanks, Lee. Will the art predicted grade that's received on Friday be their final predicted grade, or will you expect them to carry on working on their portfolios?
Yeah, it'll be the predicted grade of where we think they're going to get to. We do expect them to continue to work on their portfolios throughout this half term and the next half term, which I think leads a little bit into the There was another art question, I think. Yes, I think it was a question about, what if you've lost time for art? And I think the issue, the way this is dealt with, and it's following, there's a very specific bit of guidance from the government on this, is that where coursework, and that counts the art portfolio, is not completed, we need to mark it on what has been done. So there is no necessarily advantageous, there's no necessary advantage in a pupil having completed everything, or as opposed, as set against his classmate who might not have completed it. So we look at what has actually been completed. Now, what that doesn't do is give people a free hand to just say, right, I'm going to stop now. But it does mean that there's an expectation of where you might get to, but completion is not essential and won't mar your prospects in that subject if it's not completed.
Okay. I hope that helps. And obviously the art department would be really happy to help sort of advise on a sort of more on a one-to-one basis. That would be useful. There's a question. I know some pupils, not necessarily at Peters last year, who seem to be unfairly penalised for where they were listed in the class. Is that a factor this year? Delighted to say absolutely categorically not. That was all part of the ghastly algorithm thing, which sort of said that they sort of did this morphing out thing, and they decided that the schools had to have a certain number of grades at the top and grades at the bottom. And it didn't matter what your ability was. If you happened to be listed at that point of the list, you got that grade. It was one of the many truly appalling. I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not really the best place to criticise algorithms, but nonetheless, it was one of the truly appalling things last year. Because we simply don't have to do that process here. We're not being asked to produce a rank order of pupils to then award the grades. We're able to look at the individual pupils, all that we know about them, all that we've got on them, and then determine what we believe to be the fair and accurate grade for those particular pupils. Passing this one to Duncan, so it's to do with whether there will always be from time to time a change of teacher from one year to the next. So my son has had a change of a teacher at the start of this term. Will he be able to represent the whole 2 years worth of work? Will a change of teacher be a disadvantage? Yeah,
no, it won't be a disadvantage. I think it's important to see the way we're approaching this is that, again, following the government advice, is that, and we agree with it, is that where pupils are now at the end of the course is the best judge of how of where they are now. It's sort of almost circular in its argument. We're not assessing across the 2 years. That's important to understand. What we're doing is going, what have you achieved now? Where are you now, rather than where have you been? Because there are many pupils who started, in a really sort of comparatively weak place and have had a really meteoric rise. And there are others who started very strongly and have sort of stayed at the same sort of level. Now, those two, their end results should be the same. And we wouldn't want to sort of penalise someone who, started from a low base and moved upwards. So we're really looking as much as we possibly can at what has happened now, what is happening now, and that is why we've structured most of our calculations around what is happening in the next 2 months. And that hopefully will ensure we get the best thing. That said, we can go back to other information if we need to. GCSE grades are none at all for A-level. Sorry, the question, I'll repeat the question. How much reference is made to GCSE grades? None at all. They are quite good predictors of where people might go in the future, but what we're trying to do is say, okay, where have they got to now? And that's the question we're trying to answer.
I mean, where there is a relevance to them is that where we've seen pupils and had them with us for years and years, you have got that backstory of understanding how a pupil has performed, so that all that goes into that professional judgment. There's a question about the pupils going through the motions for the next 4 months, so confirming there's still scope to improve on his current predicted grades. Well, yes, because there's this whole process now between now and half term. Which where although we can look backwards, nonetheless the starting point is going to be seeing how they're performing as we go through the next stages, and then working backwards from there.
Just say the predicted grade is a reference point for us. Some pupils will get better than that. There will be pupils who do less well than that. So that there isn't a sense that you can say, oh yeah, my predicted grade, I'm okay with that. No.
Okay.
So the mini tests. Same marks per minute as a real A. So the question here is, the government stated that mini tests should not be set under exam conditions and will not be timed. Why are the final assessments the same marks per minute as a real A-level exam? Well, I think first of all, the government didn't say that. Is the first sort of response to that. The press sort of said that. But if you look at what the government has recommended, they've recommended assessments, they're providing exam questions. We are going to try and make sure that time isn't nearly the sort of factor that it usually is. So it's, so time shouldn't be as much of an issue, but the guidance is not that they shouldn't be sat under timed, nor that they shouldn't be exams.
Okay, and about study leave as well. Well, we think that there will be adequate time, both in terms of the Easter holiday, but also in the run up through, and that knowledge of what's coming up and the timetable for things and the content that's coming through. And it won't be encompassing the entire sixth form study, because of course there's the content that's been taken out as well. So there's a deadline. So the question here too is some subjects haven't specified yet what's going to be tested in the summer. So this is really getting to the heart of when will we know from each subject what's going to be tested and what's the structure for those for the summer.
Yeah, I expect that during by the middle of next week you will know what is going to be in each of the assessments there. One of the things we have to do is to build the exams and then work back from that and say, look, this is the sort of stuff which is going to be in that. So it's 2 days effectively into the term, and by the middle of next week, you should know what is going to be in each of your papers and the timetable for that. So that means that when you go into the summer term, and when you come to, one thing I sort of didn't mention, which is sort of news coming your way shortly, is that we're going to run some parents' evening for the upper sixth next week. In a similar way to the way we did it in October. So at that point, you will know what is in each of the papers, what content is there, what content is not there, so that you'll know well ahead of the Easter holidays what the shape of that first half of term is going to be.
And again, it all comes back to this window of time from when they first started to come out. This is why we started doing our forward planning on this when the consultation came out, because you could sort of see that the consultation was going in a certain direction. So you could sort of predict that this would happen. It's been one of the factors that's coming out from the Department for Education for months now. So things coming through very, very late in the day. So that's why we started our forward planning when we saw what the consultation was containing. So when we got the first bits of information from Ofqual, started to firm that one up, but then likewise wanted to keep the information coming out to all of you before we necessarily had absolutely every bit of data and information, because we're trying to make the best of the time that we have available. So again, sorry for the short notice of the parents' evening coming through next week. We haven't just assumed that you're not going out at all in the evenings and that you're going to be hanging around at home, but just trying, as I say, as we've been sort of seeing the shape of the weeks turning out. But hopefully that will provide sort of in the middle of that 3-week window of time before the end of term, a good chance to catch up on where things are and some more clarity as well. A question from Fiona, will there be any consideration consideration given to normalise the grades where a section of the subject hasn't been completed?
Yeah, if the section of the subject hasn't been completed, it won't be tested. And that's where we have the freedom. While every question we have is going to be, look like and may well have been a past exam paper question, we're not testing the whole course. We're certainly not testing anything which hasn't been covered. And some of the things which we have covered are coming out of it. So that pupils have less concentrated, less quantity of things to revise. Okay.
Okay, sorry, I'm smiling because there's one of my favourite questions of all time has just come in to do with leavers dinners. I'll answer the other question first, which is when will the pupils know what subjects? So we've done that one. No, actually, yeah. We can move on to the fun question, which is great. Okay, so the enjoyable question is at the end of all this pressure, is there going to be the usual leavers dinners with parents, and what's the likely date? So just to talk about the end of the academic year. So I don't know about you, every time I sort of think, gosh, blimey, 21st of June, Midsummer's Day, all restrictions lifted, I can almost barely imagine what that's going to be like. It's been so long. And I think there's a part of me that just is so desperate for it to happen. I'm almost not wanting to think too much about it in case it jinxes the whole thing. That's where we're hoping. If I can broaden this back, I'll broaden back to how I hope the whole of the summer term might start to look. It would seem to me to be completely bonkers to have the total sort of structures we've got in place now for bubbles and everything on the 20th of June, and then on the 21st of June say there are no restrictions and rush back into the house and do things. So what I mean by that is I'm hopeful that what we'll see as we go through the summer term is our ability to gradually start to change and adapt how we do things. And some of the sort of the early sort of indicators of that for me would be things like increasing the number of bubbles that a child is allowed in. So at the moment, they're pretty much in a year group bubble unless they're a boarding pupil, in which case they're in those two bubbles. The Cathedral, the Minster choristers are in another bubble for that very specific reason, but that's kind of where we are. So the first indicator of that will be when we're able to start to say, well, we can mingle more year groups into bubbles for music, for example, and for sport in particular, and really, really hopeful that we're going to end up with some sporting fixtures. Just a bit of insight for you here. Our sports department have been in contact with all the schools on our circuit, trying to get some indicative dates for fixtures to come through. We're really keen to get a programme in as soon as we possibly can. What we're encountering at the moment is it's sort of an interesting balance that that those schools which have boarding pupils have been much more sort of open to the notion and wanting fixtures, and those schools which don't have any boarders have been very kind of hesitant indeed. And we think it's because schools like ours have actually had boarders around, and we've been a lot more used to having people around. And so therefore our attitude has always been, well, let's start with what's possible rather than what might not be. So at the moment we're trying to get a decent looking fixtures list set up for the pupils as we go through next term. So first of all, I love and would hope to see a gradual relaxing of the bubble system as we start to move towards hopefully 21st of June, that longed for date. We'd all absolutely love it. Now, we haven't yet confirmed what the last 3 weeks of the year should look like or could look like for the upper sixth and the fifth form. It's partially because, to be frank with you, the whole CAGS thing is the big focus for us at the moment. We would like to provide some interesting, useful things for them. We'd like to give them a bit of a slice of normal life as much as we can as well. We doubt there's going to be as many sort of buzzing off to the beach and things as there might have been, but there might be those sorts of things. So we're looking at what to do with them to give them a really good sense of an ending and a really good bring of it back in together. The Leavers Ball, the date is there on that Friday night. The 9th of July, so the date is there, and obviously be absolutely tremendous if we did that. Leavers dinners for the upper sixth form as well. If you remember, we tried to get those through last March, just as things were going all a bit Lollapalooza as well. So try and make sure we get the Leavers dinners in. Cabaret, we'd love so much to see cabaret happening in those final 3 weeks. as well. And I was in touch with the Dean sort of back end of last week, just to say, look, how's about it? Because we'd adore to be back in the Minster for Commem as well. And the Dean, obviously, under the restrictions of saying, well, we will have to wait and see what restrictions are in place at the time. The Dean is really warm and very supportive of getting Peters back into the Minster for Commem as well. This now falls into my, I don't want to get too optimistic and jinx the universe type territory, but that's the sort of the way that our brains are thinking as to how we go about doing this. And obviously, if we're in the Minster, then it would be a tremendous opportunity to invite last year's upper sixth form to come back and do something of a double bubble type thing for the Commem that they missed out on as well. And if the Minster for some reason isn't available, we've already started putting our minds to the fact that we've got a chapel and a mem hall that can accommodate a good number of people as well, and so doing things here on site at school. So if I simply say to you that please be assured, my goodness, we need some joy and euphoria after everything that we've all been through for the last few months, and that's completely how we're going to be trying to look at things as we come towards the end of the time of this wretched experience. There's no other. It's just thank you so much. It just says I'm sure most of us are very conscious of the tremendous strain that's put on all schools, and the way Peter's communicated information has been greatly appreciated, including tonight. Thanks to all the staff and especially the SLT for all the work that's been done. It was a delight to see and hear pupils on the campus today whilst on a walk nearby. Completely agree with that. Thank you so much. That's really kind. We're really conscious that so many of you have been working under extraordinary pressure as well, and for you as parents to go through an experience where in your own professional lives you've got all sorts of change and uncertainty and things that you've had to grapple with, and at the same time be parents to your wonderful boys and girls and see them, and how could you not feel, gosh, they're not getting the sort of sixth form that I had at school, or I'd love them to have. I feel for last year's upper sixth enormously. I think this year's upper sixth, their lives started to change halfway through the lower sixth, which normally, in my experience, is when life starts to get really, really good fun. And so summer of your lower sixth is often one of those bits of life you look back on later on and think, yeah, that was lovely. That was a really wonderful patch of time. So for you to have been going through this experience yourself with whatever's going on in your personal and professional lives, and also parenting your boys and girls and seeing how they've been sort of operating and adapting, they've been overwhelmingly magnificent. I have to say that I think they'll turn out to be just a brilliant bunch of adaptable, flexible, pragmatic young men and women who I think will go on to do great things. So I suppose thank you for those lovely comments. It really is massively appreciated. The support that we've felt from you has been tremendous and has really sustained us and helped us. So I'd really just like to finish with a massive round of applause, metaphorically, to all of you as parents, because I think you've done an amazing job, and you should be really proud of yourselves as well as your boys and girls for the way that you've looked after them and supported them through what's been quite an astonishing period of time. So thank you. Hopefully a sort of a cheery and upbeat note on which to end this evening. The last thing I would say is, obviously, on a session like this, we're drawn into some quite generic answers, and there, of course, are 124 individual human beings behind those answers. So please do just use the normal structures to keep in contact with us. Use those parents' evenings that you've got, but also use all the usual means of communication to ask any questions, follow things up, and ask things about your particular sons and daughters. So on that note, so 10 to 8. I've no idea what's on telly or what's on later on the scene, but I think that class is released, I suppose. But it's been wonderful seeing you, and thank you so much for being along this evening. All the very best from us.